Hello.
Hello there, Niels. Hi to everyone joining. This is our second try at this webinar. We're just double checking everything is working. I can see we're streaming live on YouTube. Looks like we're live on LinkedIn. Welcome if you're joining us there. Brilliant. Yep, we are live. And Facebook too.
Great.
Fantastic. Right. Well, please, if you are joining us for this chat about editing, tell us what you are working on. Are you a writer? Are you an editor? Are you something else? Everybody is welcome. Use the chat. We're going to be having lots of interesting chat about editing with Niels. He's a professional editor. Welcome along, Kasha. She says we've got a weird buzzing sound in the background. Yes, that is Niels' microphone. We've done our best. We've got some audio issues, but
Wait,
I
one
hope
moment.
it's not
Wait, one
too
moment.
much of a distraction. Now look what you've done. He's gone.
It might be that my air conditioning is making it a bit worse. Let's see.
Hello, welcome,
This.
Letitia. You're a medical writer. Keep your comments coming in. Who are you? Where are you from? What do you write or what do you edit? A little bit of background about me. I'm Phil. Hopefully, a few people know that by now. I'm a writing coach and a writer myself, and I'm also an editor. I do some editing. Niels, who are you? Tell everybody who you are, and then we'll chat about what we're working on at the moment and get into the editing chat for today.
Hi, I'm Niels Kwakernaak. I'm a professional editor, mostly in nonfiction, actually only in nonfiction, and I am a writing coach. So that's basically the short of it.
Excellent. Tell us what you are working on at the moment.
At the,
It's not a secret.
no, it's not a secret. Actually, I'm mostly doing web copy at this moment, and in the meantime, setting up my coaching business. So I'm sort of I recently edited a book about a cat, and actually I see that the author is also among the listeners, so that's nice. A very nice book about a cat who passed away, and I get to work on very nice projects, very interesting, very different kinds of projects. And right now I'm focusing really on trying to also get more into coaching, helping authors to start their books, to conceptualize their books, and to bring it all the way to the finish, to a finished product. Because it is clear that editing is in itself is just a very expensive thing, and the more I can help writers get their manuscripts in the very best shape, the less the editing will cost them.
Yeah, there's so much to talk about. I mean, I should have said as well. I'm a fiction writer, and Niels is a non-fiction editor, so we've got quite a lot covered there. Great that you're getting into coaching, and this space for writing, authors, editing is changing all the time, and I like that so many people, me included, and you it seems, are trying to help out in all of these in-between places, because not everybody knows about the book industry, not everybody knows about publishing, about editing, about all of these different things. We need to be so multifaceted to make it work, and not everybody's got thousands and thousands of dollars lying around to pay some Penguin Random House editor to knock their work into shape before getting a penny in return. So it's great. We're going to answer some of these questions that you might have. If you've got questions, just type them into the chat anytime, and we'll get to them at the end or when they make sense. And yeah, let's get cracking and start asking Niels about his editing work and reveal this method, which we'll get to later, which can help you to edit your own work. That's why we're here.
Yes.
The first question that I think is very misunderstood by many people in the industry, by many writers, is it's a two-part question. What do editors do, and what are the different types of editing?
What editors do? there are many different kinds of editors, but I'm talking about manuscript editors, so those who really make their hands dirty on your manuscript. They're actually working on the manuscript. Their purpose is, or their goal is, to make your book better. That is the short job description. We want to make your book as good as possible and ready to be published. But manuscripts can be almost finished, or they can be not at all finished. They can be a complete mess, or they can be almost perfect once they leave the writer's desk. So in traditional publishing, and I adopt this also for self-publishing, you have 3 layers of editing. The first layer is developmental editing, where the editor looks at the entire document and checks, is the structure okay? Does the whole structure work? Is the tone okay for the target audience? Is everything in proportion? Like you have a thesis, a certain statement that you want to support throughout your book. That is the main point that you want to make with your book. And does the whole book work to support that thesis? Or are there segments that don't make any sense, that actually have no real purpose in the book? So those kind of questions the developmental editor tries to answer and give the author directions as to how to fix issues on the large scale. And then there's a second layer, and that is line editing. And here the editor really looks at whether the text itself flows well, whether the logic at the smaller level runs well, whether the reader gets a good reading experience just from how one sentence flows into the other. And also it checks whether the sentences are not too long, and sometimes sentences need to be cut off, sometimes sentences have to be moved around to make it all flow better. It is actually about making the text more beautiful and give it a better flow. And then the last kind of editing, the last layer, is copy editing, and that is the last thing that happens before the document goes to typesetting. And there the editor checks the spelling, the grammar, the consistency, the hyphenation, all these details that have to be consistent, that have to work. Those are the things that people will notice the first, actually, when they open a book and begin to read. Those are the things that jump to the eye, like, hey, wait a second, there's a spelling error. Oh, this hyphenation doesn't work. Oh, hey, this table has capitalization there, and this table has the capitalization differently. All these things to make it consistent, to make it solid, to make it correct. That is the last step. And then the document goes to typesetting.
Yeah, I think all the writers out there probably had that one instance, when me included, when people absolutely love to point out one kind of miscapitalization or missed hyphen or something, and it's like, yeah, I've got a book here, but if that's what you see, then fine. So editors can help out in that respect. They're the reason why we don't get
you have it much less, because when you hire an editor, you have that much less. And also after typesetting, there is yet another step, and that is proofreading, and that's not to be confused with editing. This is the last safety net, so to say, where a proofreader really looks at every syllable, every letter, every hyphen, every comma, every semicolon, everything, and checks whether everything is correct. In this stage, no big edits are being made anymore, but it's trying to make sure that the book comes out without any errors. And it is thanks to proofreaders that if you have a book that is really error-free, basically.
Yeah, I think that was definitely a big misconception among, authors, first-time authors, let's say. They think proofreading and editing is the same thing, and it's different, but they're close enough that we can certainly understand why people think that way. Let me ask the question of, why might somebody need help in any of those 3 areas? You have an author, they know what they want to write, they've produced a book, and they want to make it a good product and something nice. What kind of questions might they have, or triggers might there be for an author to say, hey, I need a line editor or I need a developmental editor?
I think it's mostly the responses they get from other people, because, well, it is Zinsser who wrote in his on Writing Well that most writers don't realize how poor, or most people don't realize how poorly they write until somebody points it out to them. Often authors realize only where something needs to be done by the time they actually have an editor do a sample edit, or they send out their manuscript and hear, well, it has problems in this area or that area or such or so. And after a while, also, I think authors begin to develop sort of awareness of where their weak points are. So if I get clients from all kinds of different stages in their manuscript. I recently started with somebody who doesn't even really know what the book is going to be about. Like, the subject is clear, but the point of view not. She's still working on what the thesis might become. So that is very early on in the process, and she came to me to figure out, like, what do I want to say. So that actually comes a bit closer to coaching, so trying to unlock that story that is in there somewhere. And sometimes somebody just wants to know whether it is okay. Like, can I publish it this way? That's actually most of the time. People, writers come to me, send me their manuscript. Hey, can you have a quick look at this? And sometimes I have to tell them, sorry, but I think this might become a bit more expensive than you expect, because they expect then that it is only a question of some spelling errors that need to be corrected. But I see run-on sentences and dangling modifiers and ambiguity and continuity issues that novice writers often don't realize they're making.
Yeah, I think, for me, there's a big difference between, there's a blurred line between, the kinds of social media writing and content that people produce and a product which you put out like a book where you seek to gain authority. Whatever your field is, whether it's, fiction or non-fiction or whatever kind of book you're writing, I think it's important to put out a product where you build trust and build authority. That's really the reason why a lot of people write books nowadays. That's why I think that whatever stage of your writing career you're at, it's important to work with editors so that you can grasp the difference between edited work and non-edited work. I myself work in both fields. Sometimes I hit publish on a hasty blog or social media post that isn't necessarily my best work or has an error in it, but I also work with strict editors who are going to check every syllable. So yeah, important that other people look at your work, and good to clarify like why people might need an editor in the first place.
Yeah, definitely.
Doing a lot of research about it.
Well, what you point out is very true, that there's really a difference between, at least if I get your point right, a difference between a blog post or a social media post or a book. Like a book, you want to have different standards for a published book. That needs to be better, because if you allow errors in your book, you come across as somebody who is not diligent in their work. So it's very important that the book is solid, especially if you want to gain authority in your field with it. Social post, well, everybody knows that you sometimes just have an idea, you write it down and publish it, and then sometimes you go back and edit it because there's a comma in the wrong place or whatever, or you made a spelling error, or someone sends you a message, hey, did you see that error? Oops. That stuff happens, and everybody knows that happens on social media. And people are also reading so fast, they're skimming often, and so I think many errors are also just going unnoticed. But when somebody sits down to read a book, they sit down to study your stuff, basically. Errors will pop up they will stand out much more. and it will also be perceived as a bigger problem. I think, like if you take it so seriously that you publish a book, then make sure that you do it right. That's so I think people perceive these things in a very different way.
Yeah, great points. It's about the reading intention, and we read a lot more deeply when we are engrossed in a story or in a book. And it's also about the longevity of work. Like if you've got a book that says, here's my wonderful self-help method, then that's, hopefully going to last for a long time, and people are going to want to read that. But if you hit publish on a post on Facebook, well, that's here today, gone tomorrow.
Right.
This is a good question from Leticia. Thanks for your question. She says, at what point in the process do you contact an editor? I think that's worth answering now before we go on. What do you reckon, Niels?
That really depends on where you are in your own writing process, how experienced you are, and what kind of field you are in. As I just said, sometimes people approach me because they want to get more clarity about their own ideas, and that is then I'm also already doing editing. That falls under the developmental editing. So that might be a point that you want to hire an editor. But it can also be all the way at the end when you think, okay, I want to be certain before I send this out to publishers or alpha, beta readers or whatever, that it is somewhat solid. In all these different stages, you can hire an editor. The earlier in the stage you go, the more money you end up paying. That is one thing to keep in mind. If you hire me, for example, to work on your thesis and to unlock that story inside, and then I coach you, for example, until your first draft, and then I take on your editing project, then those sums of money, of course, add up. That is more expensive in the end. Then when you go through this whole project yourself, or maybe get some help at the beginning and then work through the steps of my framework by yourself, and then all the way at the end, when basically spelling and grammar and consistency are the main issues, then you hire me. That will be much less expensive. So I think the budget is always something to take into account, and your own level of experience. Writers who are very unexperienced, it would probably be good for them to hire an editor in an earlier stage so that they will not sort of petrify their mistakes, because the further in the process you get, the more difficult it becomes to revise, to make structural edits. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, some good points. I mean, I always advise people go big to small. It's worth thinking about the big things first, as you said.
Yeah.
If you're going to say, hey, this section makes no sense and let's cut this out, it's good to be able to make those calls rather than editing the fine stuff and then thinking, oh, that wasn't worth it. I mean, another advice I'd give on that is do as much as you can. And then when you've done the maximum that you can and you've made the manuscript the best that you can without somebody looking at it, without professional help, make it as absolute best as you can, and then ask for help. If you're struggling with what the manuscript actually is and how it's going to operate and work, then that's the developmental editing stage, and you'll need to contact someone a bit earlier. But let's say somebody is going to self-publish a book in December. When should they get in touch with an editor? Like by this I mean,
if they have
for copy editing.
If they have a deadline in December, well, it depends, of course, on how big the book is. Like when I work on a mini book of 10,000, 11,000 words, then that can be finished in a matter of days. But when I have I did a book for a therapist once, which was really like, I think in total was like 100,000 words or so. That took me weeks to get through, and then usually editing goes into in a couple of steps. First, I walk through the entire document, and if we're talking about copy editing now and line editing, I go through the entire document and make all the necessary revisions. Then I might go through a second time if there's enough money, Then it goes to the author, and the author checks my revisions, and most of the time they accept most of it. Like usually they see that it is an improvement. Sometimes there's some arguing, and then the author, of course, gets gets what he wants. And then it comes back to me after that, and that can take weeks. That depends on how much time the author has. To go through a book of like 300 to 500 pages, it can take weeks to go through all these revisions, because some pages have like 100 revisions. Depends on how much I need to change, and all these changes need to be checked by the author. So, and then it comes back to me, and depending on how much the author changed, I'm gonna need a whole lot of time to work through all of these author's revisions again. So you have to really calculate months for this project. So if you have a hard deadline in December, I would definitely start with the editor half a year before to be safe. Sometimes the process can be done in like 2 months or something like that. But if you have really a hard deadline, it's better to really take enough time. Also, of course, there is the work that the typesetter needs to do, so and that also takes a couple of weeks sometimes, and then the print, of course. So
yeah, of course, there are many different options with self-publishing, and it's quicker in general than traditional publishing. I'd say if you plan to launch a book in December, it's good to have your manuscript finished and be in contact with an editor 6 months before, so you have lots of time to plan everything and not rush things. Every project's different, so it depends on what you're doing, but certainly takes a few months, doesn't it, for editing to get seen to.
Yeah, think of it that an editor is also usually an entrepreneur. So we are not editing 8 hours a day. That is just not possible. It is also, editors usually don't have the mind space for that. It is very intensive work. After 4 to 6 hours, you're numb. You cannot edit anymore. And then you also have your business to run, which is hours a day too. So you sort of need to cut your day in half, and half of your day you're doing your marketing and the connections and the stuff like what we're doing now, and the other half you're doing your editing, and then also there's coaching. And so logically, if it takes you about 15 hours to read through a book, if you're just reading it, you're not doing anything with it, it might take you somewhere between 8 and 15 hours to read a book at an average tempo. The editor needs to read the entire book, but much slower, So you see already that if you work like 4 to 6 hours a day, and then you have to read through the book a couple of times, and your tempo of reading is very slow too, because every time you make a revision, you need to go back to the beginning of the sentence and read it again to see if you didn't introduce any new errors. It is just going to take a whole lot of time, and because you only have a certain number of hours each day to actually edit, it's logical that it takes weeks, sometimes months.
Sure thing. What are some errors that authors make, or what are some problems or some mistakes, let's say, which they might avoid? Have you got any tips on that front?
Definitely, I would say just make sure that you know the spelling and grammar rules, that you just know them. It takes you a few hours to read a grammar book and just to learn where the commas should go, and how hyphenation works. It is not very complicated, but I see that many writers never really took the trouble of learning that. So it is a skill that can save you money on editing if you can do that yourself. Because it's amazing how often I find commas where they have no business being, So that's one thing, and the difference between your and you, and the possessive and the you are. Make sure that you know these things and you don't make these errors anymore. So that is sort of the obvious, and make sure that you also understand how grammar works, the parts of speech. That you know how dangling modifiers work. For example, when is a modifier a dangler? For example, I wrote something stupid down here. Walking out the door, the light was still on. Um, this sentence literally says that the light was walking out the door. Well, of course, what I mean is walking out the door, I forgot to switch the light off, Um, so the participial phrase needs to have the same subject as the main clause. I mean, it modifies the subject of the independent clause that follows it. If there is another subject, in this case the light, then that doesn't connect well. And so you have a dangling modifier. And those errors I find a lot in even of professional writers still. I have a whole list of kinds of errors that we could walk through. If you're
And of
interested.
course, when writers have a very high level of English, but it's not their first language, and they may be writing in that, then there are all sorts of issues which may crop up. So, I mean, my advice on errors to avoid would be, what are the errors you're most likely to make because of your language background or your, your cultural background maybe, and also investigate the issues. Don't just use Grammarly and click yes when it's underlined something in red and you're just desperate to get rid of that red line and you think yes whatever you say. There's no point in that because it will fix a lot of the problems like the dangling modifiers, but you won't learn not to do it again. So
it doesn't fix the dangling modifiers. At least in my experience, it's it doesn't know what I'm trying to say. So Grammarly might think that I actually mean that.
There are many things it cannot fix, that is for sure. But even if you use it and do you find it helpful, just look into things in more detail because it's not always realistic that everybody's devouring grammar books, even if they are a keen writer. But little by little is a good way to learn these things, and just start asking why is that a comma there and not there, and so on. Let's talk about your FIRE framework. I'm interested in getting into that. That's why everybody's here today. How can writers save themselves a bit of money and also gain a higher quality work through using this method? What does it stand for and how does it work?
The FIRE framework, that's what it's called, stands for F, finishing your draft, I, inspecting your structure, R, refining your lines, and E, editing the details. And what it does is starting big and zooming in. And that in a very deliberate way, like separate steps in which you focus on the big issues, the smaller issues, and the smallest issues. And by dividing those steps, everything that might possibly go wrong gets more attention. Because the thing is, if you write your draft and then begin editing whatever you notice, oh, here, this is wrong. Oh, the structure could, you get overwhelmed by the things that need to happen and you start missing things. So actually the FIRE framework is mimicking this principle of developmental editing, line editing, and copy editing, and turning that into very practical steps to focus on exactly those things that are important at that moment, at that stage of your manuscript. So you finish your draft. There are different frameworks for finishing your draft, but that's the first step. Make sure that the draft is finished, all the words are there. And then you look at the whole thing. Proportions. Are the proportions okay? Is the structure logical? Is there stuff in there that shouldn't be there? Is there stuff missing? Is the tone right? Is the tone consistent? And once you have that done, you have inspected that structure, maybe made a reverse outline or something like that. You can say, okay, the structure of this document, as a whole is now okay. So we can put that aside. You let it lay in a drawer for a while. You just put it away for a while. A number of days is probably best, or maybe even weeks. And then you come back to it and you start focusing on the lines, on the sections, on the paragraphs and the sentences themselves to make that flow better, just like I just explained that line editors do. And you check if there's continuity. Is it like as if you are in a car and driving on a new road. You can just sit back and you can hear yourself think. If your document is really sort of a mess and there are continuity problems, and so it will be like a bumpy road. Bump, 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 it does not give a good reading experience, and that is really what you focus on when you are refining the lines, and that is then the R step. And then you zoom in further to make sure that everything is also correct. So then you forget about the structure, you forget about the beauty of the sentences and the flow. Although if you notice problems, of course, you fix them still, but that is not your focus. Then you focus completely. On whether it is correct, whether spelling is, hyphenation is consistent, all those things that we also just mentioned. So by zooming in, you can every time leave the previous steps behind and really focus on one thing at a time. And then you don't get confused. So in the end, you end up with a final manuscript that is much stronger, in every regard. And then you save a lot of time, you save your editor a lot of time, and you save yourself a lot of money.
Yeah. So what you're saying there, just to summarize a little bit, is it's almost like 4 separate edits, right? Like 4 separate jobs that you would do, and then say, hey, that's done. Let's leave it for a while and come back to it and look at it again. And that is the method that going big to small will help it be better.
Yeah, and I think it's also good to add that in one stage you do already make some notes maybe of things you want to pay extra attention to at the next stage. So sort of you can do some sort of triage. When you are looking at the entire structure, you might notice parts that you think, bleh, that is just nuts. That doesn't feel right. It is boring or whatever. Then you can make a comment there or so, or a note on in your legal pad or something like, okay, that section I need to start with that section in the next step. First fix the biggest issues, and then only then go start at the beginning again through the entire document.
Got it. We've got a few questions here, and we'll get to them when we can. I thought I'd just show this one because I have no idea what Ton is talking about here, but. Hi Ton, thanks for coming.
Okay,
what's
he's
the hoofdstukken.
The hoofdstukken, the chapters. Okay, I didn't mention it. I work in Dutch and in English, and this book about the cat was in Dutch. So we have a Dutchman here, Ton. So it's
a chapter.
I started with chapters first. I think there's some sort of a conversation going on in the chat or so, and that he's responding to somebody else here.
Maybe.
Yeah.
We have this other question from Kasha about reverse outline. Yeah, I'll be interested in hearing more about that. What is a reverse outline?
What it is? Okay, I think it is the most effective tool to analyze your own structure. It is a time-consuming tool, but it is wonderful. It boils down to that you. For every section or every paragraph or every point you're trying to make in your writing, you write down a summarization of it, a small summarization, like a few words, maybe one phrase or one sentence, and that sentence sort of summarizes one paragraph or one section. And you do that throughout the book, so you end up with a reverse outline of the entire book, sort of a summarization. You call it a reverse outline because usually you start with an outline. You develop your thesis and then sub-thesis, and you begin to outline the entire book, all the ideas. Where do all the ideas go? And then you end up with an outline that you can then base your draft on. Reverse outlining is sort of reverse engineering your book. So every chapter or every sentence or every paragraph gets its own little. No, I'm saying that wrongly. Sorry. Every paragraph or every point that you're trying to make, you summarize on a legal pad or in an Excel document or whatever you want to use, and you end up with a long list of sentences, and that summarizes your book. And you can format that a little bit with sort of an indented list or that sort of thing. And it helps you to get a very strong overview of what your book actually is. And you begin to notice, for example, if the proportions are wrong. You see that that you are um, giving way too much attention to an essay, for example, for something that's just not so relevant, just something that you just, no, that should be one paragraph is 10 paragraphs, for example. So if you reverse outline your book, you begin to see those issues. You begin to see difficulties in structure. You begin to see possibilities like, hey, wait a second, maybe if I put this part at the beginning, the book will have a stronger start. You know, um, a book is an extremely long document. If it has 80,000 words, it is daunting to sort of wrap your mind around everything that's in that book. This is a way to summarize the book in such a way that you can see the structure, um, and and get more of a sense of what is happening, what you did. You know.
You can gain a lot of clarity by continuing that process and stripping those sentences down as far as possible. I know in the world of fiction, I can't remember where I saw this, but somebody advised writing what your book is about in 9 sentences. So you sort of have the 9 elements or beats in the story, and then reducing that to 3. So it'd be like the acts of the story, and then reducing it to 1. And then you've got your log line or something that when people say, hey, what's your book about? You can say that, you can repeat it, and you can get confident about what your book is and how you can market it. So that's definitely doing some work on that is going to help you on the editing side and on the marketing side of what you're putting out.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, it is a bit double. You know, I begin in a way with that process of creating an outline. You know, of creating a thesis, creating an outline, drafting, and then sort of this reverse outline idea to see if you actually did what you intended to do and if that is open for improvement. So this reverse outline, you could actually also use your original outline for that, and then just sort of make notes whether it is indeed the way you intended it to be. But it is, yeah, it is a process. You then reverse the process to sort of self-check and improve it further.
Yeah, perfect. We've talked a bit about saving money and said, hey, all these writers out there, if you edit your own work well, then you can save money, but it's of course still necessary if you're putting out professional product that you want to get it seen by an editor. What would be the difference between somebody who submits a manuscript which is pretty rough and hasn't gone through any of this process, and a writer, an author, who has done all of this work and gone through the FIRE framework as best they can? You don't have to say in terms of dollars and cents, but what might be the difference to the cost of a project?
Well, that can be enormous. One of the biggest issues I come across with, well, especially writers who are not professionals, but in the self-publishing field, they don't notice it when they have continuity issues. And continuity issues, yeah, that would mean that there is information missing, so that the reader will think, wait a second, how did this happen, or how did you suddenly come to this conclusion? That the writer has the idea in their mind and think, hey, wait a second, or are just writing it too fast or so, or assume that the reader understands something. Then you get a continuity issue, that there is a hiccup in the logic or in the narrative. And in other places, you could have information that shouldn't be there, that is interrupting the reader's experience, because suddenly there is some information that you think, oh, wait a second, this I need to process. And every time a reader needs to do more processing, burn more calories processing a piece of information than necessary, that interrupts the reading experience. So I help writers get this to flow better. This line editing idea. And improve the continuity, but it often means that I have to delete something over here to put it over there, and then signal words like because or are no longer connected sometimes, like if a sentence starts with that's because and then blah 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 blah, then it is referring to the sentence that came before. But suppose I need to remove and replace this sentence that came before, or put it in a different place, then suddenly that doesn't connect anymore. So I need to also rewrite the other sentence, and then read the entire section to see if the result is still okay, if it didn't introduce new continuity issues. So if I have to edit at that level, it's going to be extremely expensive, because that is a whole lot of work.
So it might end up being sort of double the work for you and double the time for the writer to rewrite things and to check everything. There's a lot more back and forth. It's going to be double the cost.
And this, this takes deliberation from the writer to prevent these errors. The common denominator with most of these big errors is just to step back and look at what you did. Read your own stuff and let it mellow for a little bit, and then read it slowly. You should not want to go fast. When you are a writer, you need to take your time, because writing is a craft that takes time. So these continuity issues, if you slow down and read your prose very slowly, preferably aloud, then you might start to see these things. And every time you have a period, you check, where did I leave with this last sentence? Where did I leave my reader? Where is the reader now when I'm entering the next sentence? And hey, wait a second, why are we suddenly going here? Well, the reader probably expects that we're going there, because that creates a dissonance with what they expect, and that can be a powerful tool, but most of the time that's just annoying. So to be very deliberate, to take a step back and very carefully look at what you wrote. That is often the solution to these problems.
Yeah, I think it's possible for experienced writers to do that, and if you read things slowly several times, you can spot your own continuity or logic issues. It's still much easier for a fresh reader to find that, and whether that's a colleague or someone you work with, or someone who helps you with your writing, or a partner, or someone you just want to show it to, they don't come at that text from the perspective of worrying about the commas and the best word choices. They want to understand the story or the idea behind it. So they're going to flag up those issues much quicker. Of course, don't take one person's word for it.
And also tell them what you expect of them. Very, very clear in what you want them to do. Because sometimes when you give work to somebody to review, you get way more feedback than you're waiting for, or feedback that is absolutely.
Oh, it was good. And you're like, that's the worst feedback. Right.
Yeah. But the point is, you need to be specific in what you want them to do and what you don't want them to do, because, you could get all kinds of feedback that has nothing to do with the stage in the project where you are now. Like if it is about clarity, if it is about logic, structure, or whatever, then it is not so helpful if somebody is pointing out hyphenation issues.
Yeah, for me, it comes down to questions, like whether it's improving your own work, asking someone for help, working with an editor. Have a big list of very detailed questions that relate to your project, your purpose for it, and trying to get to the bottom of those questions, whether they're, the character motivations make sense, or whether the argument has any gaps in it, or whether there's any sources which aren't mentioned thoroughly enough. Like those are the questions that you need to think of in your own personal sort of editing checklist. And to be honest, the more of those you can answer, the cleaner the manuscript you can deliver to an editor, so they can
absolutely
professionally done.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, you're still yourself. You are the person who has to fix the problem, so you also need to understand the problem. So there is really value to spending time in understanding what continuity is and what kind of problems may arise in continuity, so that you can learn to recognize them yourself. Or if somebody says, I don't know, there's something wrong here in this paragraph, I cannot quite put my finger on it, but there's, and then you can start to analyze that and think, wait a second, here's a sentence that actually that should have been a little bit lower,
Yeah, I think going back to the need for editors in the types of writing that we read thoroughly, be it detailed investigative journalism or nonfiction books or a story, we're so used to reading quality published works that we don't get those annoyances of the lack of continuity or stories or things which don't make sense. But I do find myself now when I read, I might read a self-published work, and you get all of these questions sort of firing in your brain while you're reading it, and it makes you kind of annoyed, like, that doesn't make sense, like, what, why have they said that? Or like, oh, I don't agree with that. It's very distracting, and we're so used to reading things of such a high quality that we don't get those questions. The reason for that high quality is this man right here and other editors.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely true. I think it was Stephen King who said, like, there are few things as valuable for writers as reading badly written books. It's then you start seeing where it can go wrong. And it is very easy for a writer to think that they're awesome. It's like I've got this. And my mom loved it.
Totally agree. We should be reading our own work from years ago, our own work recently. Good work, bad work, all the stuff that interests you, stuff that you've been told is great. Craft books. Read widely and take from it what you can. If you've got any questions, any of the listeners or attendees out there, just drop them in the chat now. I think we've got one or two more to get to. Let's bring some up on screen. We had this one I saw earlier. We were chatting a little bit earlier about Grammarly et al. So with the new AI software which helps with grammar checking, do texts arrive with fewer mistakes?
That's a good question. I have not really noticed a difference, actually. I also do not think that everybody is making effective use of tools. Like, as we just said, if you accept everything that Grammarly suggests, then you will end up putting new errors in there, So I have seen that on social media that many posts are a bit. I see fewer errors in social media posts in general than before. Like, it used to be terrible and is now much better. So I guess people are using Grammarly and such. But the real mistakes, like the mistakes that take a lot of time for an editor to fix, that is, I don't think those are mistakes that AI aids are really helping with very much, like these continuity issues, these issues of tone, issues of humanity, actually, when a lot has to do with storytelling and that the issues that arise from that are just different from the issues that AI tools fix.
And with creative writing, you get all kinds of Grammarly read everywhere, because the writer wants to express themselves that way, and they want to be creative with punctuation and grammar, and that's okay in some instances. Yeah, really good question though. I like it. I would say that the door is open for anyone to hit publish, whether it's a book or a social media post, and that means that many more people are writing and are creating content. So overall, the standard isn't increasing, even though we have the ability to check some errors. But as Niels said, I think as AI gets integrated into platforms themselves, it will give people pause for thought before hitting publish, and maybe a few of those errors will get corrected. Maybe we'll get a few more errors because people hastily correct things. I mean, it's a double-edged sword, like all technology, I guess.
Yeah, and also the content of the comments. Like, you have these suggestions, and I never use those, by the way. They often don't make any kind of sense, or comments that sort of are are generated. I don't know how people do that, but sometimes it seems to me that they copy the post, put it into ChatGPT, rewrite and copy and paste that as a comment. So that the value of the comments
Just
that is, well, it is not getting better.
just a lot of the time using ChatGPT is an error, I would say. But
Yeah, well,
I'm
I
not as
am
big as
actually I
fan.
am AI-less. I'm in my writing processes. I am not using AI, and I do not intend to, because I value the human work. The writing is for me something that comes from the soul. It's in a way a highly spiritual thing to do, and I really try to avoid having computers mix with that process. Um, so certain AI tools, well, I use them because they're in my software, like my MailChimp or so, that I think the AI decides when certain things happen and so on, fine. But the generative, like the creation process of creation, I really want to keep that my own, because that is what being a writer is all about to me.
Yeah, I think it's important to make that distinction between spell checkers and generative AI because, before ChatGPT, no one was calling a spell checker AI. Absolutely no
Right,
one. Like AI was
right.
just not. Now it's absolutely everything. If you're sort of looking at a screen, people say, "Oh, is it AI powered?" Like, what does that mean? But I mean, generative AI. Yeah, agree. I think remember that the cost to generate something on AI, on ChatGPT, for example, is zero or virtually zero. So the value of what is produced trends to zero. It may not be zero initially, and it may have some kind of value. But remember that what you are generating trends to zero. So why are you doing that? That's
Yeah,
my
and also
my thoughts on it. We're
I
getting a bit
think writing
spicy here off
is,
topic.
I said writing is a spiritual thing, but it is also training your mind, and I want to actually take the path of more resistance. That is counterintuitive, but by taking the time to write and do that with my own brain, with my own heart, I am training a muscle. I am training a skill that I really, really do not want to lose. And I think if I would let AI do all kinds of things for me, that muscle will begin to weaken. And I think, like when I'm doing strength training, I am making it myself extra difficult, and the biceps are actually hurting under the weight. And that is what you do if you want to get your muscles to be stronger. You need to train them. You need to choose the path of more resistance. And I fear that AI is going to make people actually, lazy and weaker in their thinking, and that is why I also think, okay, I don't want to have anything to do with these kind of tools. I want to use my brain and my heart.
Yeah, I think what you said about, it's a skill that you don't want to lose. It's a skill that has value and always will because it is a human-based skill. That's my take on it. So
Exactly.
use with caution, as we often say. Right, we've got one more question that I'd like to ask you before we go. If you've got any more questions, drop them in the chat and we will get to them afterwards. We've got another couple of comments come in. But yeah, let's answer this question first. How many books more or less do you work on throughout the year? Would be interesting to know.
That's a very good question. I have worked for agencies for many years, actually for 7 years before I started on my own, and then as a company, I've also been hired again by agencies, and I just got books in my mailbox. Basically, just okay, here, do chapter so many to so many, and somebody else. And magazines, and so I have no idea how many I did throughout a year, but that was quite a lot. So I think in those 7 years, I must have done hundreds or thousands of titles. Sometimes together with a team. Since I started on my own, I that is much less because I am still a startup. I'm still trying to get my name out there. So I'm doing only a small number of books a year. But what I could do, maybe that's the nature of the question. An editor can probably, suppose you work for a couple of weeks on every book, you can how many max could you do depending on how big the book is. It will not be an awful lot. I mean, if you have to work for a couple of weeks on every book, then uh, so I don't know. I would have yet to find that out.
I would say certainly a full-length book takes several weeks to edit, so if it is double figures in a year of full-length books, it wouldn't be too many more than that, I would have thought. And also, I mean, if an editor is editing like 100 books a year, then they're probably going to go crazy.
Yeah. The only reason why I could do that with this agency was, of course, that you did a few chapters, and the rest of the team did did the rest. It was all divided, and then indeed we were churning these titles out basically. So that, but it was very good for my experience. That definitely, it really trained me to look at the details and really see the words for what they are. So working for an agency, because there was such a big workload, was actually very useful.
Great. Well, thanks so much for sharing more about your technique and lifting the lid on what editors actually do and showing people how they can do a lot of this themselves to help with the process and costs. Where can people get in touch with you?
Yourbeststory.net. That's my website, yourbeststory.net. So Your Best Story is my editing and coaching company. Also via LinkedIn. Well, if you type in Niels Kwakernaak, you will find me. Or go to one of the latest posts by Philip, because you also tagged me. And yeah, if you want to talk about book editing, or just want to know how this could work for you, you can book a free discovery call, and we can just chat. This is not it's free, and I don't expect anything of you, and it's just if you have some more questions for me personally.
This is the best thing about hardened entrepreneurs and solo business people, is that I think after a while you get past all the salesy stuff and the processes, and you say, let's just talk. And if it's the right person, then something's going to happen. If it's not, then it's not. But get in touch with Niels if you are interested in hiring him or learning more about the editing process. As ever, get in touch with me if you want to know about my writing services, my coaching services, or about badgers. And
what's the deal with the badgers, by the way?
The deal with the badgers, there's a whole long story about it, but it's a mascot for my community. So I have a community of multilingual writers, and we have a mascot who is a badger. And yeah, it's a long storytelling thing, which involves many carousels, but I'll send you a link to explain it in full.
Okay, I've seen the badgers, and I was wondering, well, yeah, it is entertaining, but I didn't really understand it yet. So send me the link.
Fair enough. All right. Yeah, thanks so much for coming on, Niels. Hope you enjoyed it, everyone, and thank you for attending and all your great questions. Hi, if you're watching this on replay, haven't shouted you out yet, and if you've got a question, drop it in the comments and we'll do our best to get back to you. And yeah, get in touch with Niels on LinkedIn, or was it yourbeststory.net?
Yourbeststory.net, yes.
Wonderful. All right. Thanks everybody for coming, and we'll catch you another time. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Bye-bye.